And welcome to our second of 3 daily space weather videos. We're starting things out looking at magnetohydrodynamic pressure here, out to about 12 Earth diameters. I think I said radii yesterday. It's about 12 Earth diameters. It's magnetohydrodynamic pressure. The scale is nanopascals. And we're seeing a pretty homogeneous pressure here. Most of the pressure in the magnetotail region. You're going to see this begin to equalize here. There you can see it equalizing toward the end. As a coronal hole wind stream subsides, let's take a look at what's going on the ground. This is ground magnetic perturbations over the past 4 hours. This is magnetic flux density, by the way, the scale shown here. Nanotesla, things are pretty calm here. At the moment, we can expect to see a significant signal late today, early tomorrow, when a coronal mass ejection is likely to strike, according to me and apparently nobody else on the internet. It's a great opportunity to demonstrate that we were watching, and some other folks apparently weren't. Next, the heliospheric current sheet, and Earth is just about to cross into, or crossing into now, into a North Pole-oriented current sheet. The plasma coming out of the Sun is oriented to a pole. The green area is the North Pole current sheet. The red area is the South Pole current sheet. We can expect to remain in a North Pole current sheet here, although we are seeing some changes happening to the solar polar fields. We'll get to that in a minute. First, the line of sight ecliptic plane field plot. It's basically the same data, but it also includes the solar magnetogram, but it's from the Earth's perspective instead of the top view, looking across the ecliptic plane instead of down at it. Next, the GOES magnetometers. There's the past 3 days of measurements from the GOES 16 and 17. And this little area right here may have been the crossing of the current sheet. Keep in mind the data that we showed in those animations is like 2 hours old. Next, the coronal hole plot, and something interesting going on here too. We see a migration of the south solar polar field. You can see right there a large portion of the field there beginning to move up to the north. You can also see the North Pole slowly moving down here toward the south as the solar polar field reversal process continues throughout solar cycle 25. Just keep in mind this data is nearly 2 hours old and the magnetic environment can change with basically no warning. So here are some more composite images. Today is the day of composite images, yes. So now you're looking at 171 and 193 angstroms. 2 different ionic states of iron. In other words, a different number of electrons in those iron electron shells. I would keep an eye on this area down here. It looks like there's quite a bit of plasma instability. Also, I kind of called it when I said sunspot 2941 becoming more and more likely to produce large flares as it approaches the limb. Here's 193 angstroms by itself. You can see this great, well-defined North Pole coronal hole over here. And here's 193 and 211 angstroms. Those are also both ionic states of iron. It's very hot iron gas, folks. By the way, that M-class flare was not accompanied with any coronal mass ejections and a barely measurable spike on the proton flux. So there's 211 angstroms by itself. It shows great depth for coronal holes, and you can see quite a few coronal holes here in the earthly zone. We can expect some high-speed wind from those in a few days. So we got all the way up to 8 sunspot groups here. I counted more like 5, but in any case, we still do have a significant likelihood of solar flares. Sunspot 2941 totally not out of view yet, and for our regular viewers, you may be aware. Our regular viewers may be aware, or probably are aware, that we can see solar flares from sunspots not even in view from the Earth. So quite a few sunspot groups here kicking up. Let's take a look at some other wavelengths here. Here's 131 angstroms, yet another ionic state of iron. This is actually the hottest wavelength that we view through the SDO. It's great at showing solar flares. And that M-class flare did come from sunspot 2941. Here we've added 1700 angstroms. It's great at showing where the active regions are. It'll show sunspots as dark regions. You can kind of see them here. And here's 1700 angstroms by itself. So this sunspot down here is still looking interesting. It looks like there's some activity there. And again, quite a few sunspot groups. So here's this M-class flare. It was barely an M-class flare. The peak flux was right at about 1730 yesterday afternoon. Another large C-class flare has happened since then. Don't be surprised to see more. Don't even be surprised to see an X-class flare, folks. It's entirely possible. So no spikes in the proton flux, a little tiny bit of a peak there in relativistic particles. Not really anything to worry about. There were some radio blackouts caused by that solar flare. And let's go to the real-time solar wind. We see the solar wind speed subsiding here as the coronal hole wind stream ends. Solar wind down to about 410 kilometers per second. Solar wind density just under 4 protons per cubic centimeter. KP index is at 1. That's a geomagnetic calm condition. And we haven't seen unrest for a couple of days there. Don't be surprised to see some late tonight and early tomorrow from a coronal mass ejection strike. Next, we got a full moon coming. Let's do a solar system forecast. So here's where things are now. We'll move this ahead 1 week. Here's where things will be in a week. We'll have a crescent waxing. Next, a star chart. We like to keep people oriented. If you're up before dawn, you might see Mars and Venus and Mercury and Saturn rising ahead of the Sun. It's a planetary pileup on the ecliptic, which is the yellow line. The blue line there is the galactic plane. Where were you when Cygnus rose? By the way, it stays up in the northern hemisphere all winter long. Did you know that Deneb is the precessional opposite end of the celestial pole? In other words, Deneb eventually becomes the celestial pole. Were you aware we've got a thread all about one star? It's actually a high-mass X-ray binary. We've got a whole forum thread at smashamash.com/forum. And let's close out this fields and features segment by looking at coronal mass ejections. We ain't got none, but here's the view from Lagrange 1 and Lagrange 5. The LASCO C3 and Stereo A coronagraph, respectively. So that's about it. Again, we're expecting a coronal mass ejection to strike tonight, early tomorrow. Thanks for tuning into our Fields and Features segment of the Daily Space Weather. One more Daily Space Weather video to premiere. And thanks for tuning in to the Smash News Network least busted name in news.